How did you view not just her conduct in the interview last night in that regard, but what we've seen so far from her campaign?
First of all, as always, Kailey, great to be with you from Charlottesville and UVA. I think a good sign for me, and I'll just answer this personally, is just what you have noted and remarked upon, and that is that the vice president hasn't been talking very much about her gender or race or ethnicity. Others certainly have, and as you say, it is historic. It's not historic at this point to have a woman at the top of the ticket because, of course, we had Hillary Clinton, and you could be understanding, I think, of maybe why she doesn't want to draw attention to that. Because that turned out poorly for Secretary Clinton, and the fact that in 2016 Donald Trump won the Electoral College and won the presidency. But I think what I'm referring to is that by my not thinking about, she's not talking about her gender or her race or ethnicity, men don't have to stand up on the stump or be at the debate or be in an interview and talk about being a man. And so we do need to get to that point where it's not old hat, but that we just move on and say, let's talk about this person's background and experience and education and qualifications. And I think that's where we are. You'll notice that Barack Obama did not want to talk a lot about race when he was running for the nomination against Hillary Clinton in 2008. But then when it came up in the controversy about his pastor, the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, he had to give a whole speech about race. And I would say the same thing as a person who studies the Kennedys and presidential history. President Kennedy, in running as Senator Kennedy in 1960, didn't really want to bring up his religion. He would become the first Roman Catholic president. But when he started being attacked in September of that election year of 1960, he gave a famous speech about being Catholic and about the separation of church and state. So in a way, I think you could say that Kamala Harris is following in the footsteps of President Kennedy and President Obama, of leaving that to the side and talking about the issues.
Although she is being attacked, to your point, the prior candidates have had to come out and address these kind of things at that point. It raises the idea that the other side of this equation is the conduct of Donald Trump and the way he is talking about her. I talked about that with Jane Hall, Associate Professor of Journalism and Media at American University earlier today, and this is what she had to say.
Women and women of color have to prove their accomplishments, and that is something that she knows, and I think that's what they're leaning on, and they're hoping that he will do the dirty work for her, frankly, be so racist in his commentary, and that will be publicized, and that's all she has to do.
So, Professor Perry, I wonder if the actual question here is as much about the way Kamala Harris talks about these things as it is about Donald Trump, because we do, of course, have multiple election cycles of his behavior to look back on as well.
We do, and that we know he makes personal comments and indeed racial comments, misogynistic comments, sexist comments, and that we also know his personal history from the Access Hollywood tape in 2016, as well as his being convicted of sexual abuse in a New York court. So we know his background and we know his propensity. And I have to agree with my colleague, don't get down in the mud and wrestle. If you only come up looking muddy yourself. I think in the case of Kamala Harris, maybe even more so than John Kennedy as a Roman Catholic or Barack Obama as a Black man. In a way, she has these three elements that could work against her among some people. So just continue to do what she's doing. She is continuing to surge in the polls. She's had a great 5 weeks. She had an almost perfect convention. She did fine last night in the interview. Now the next big challenge for her will be the debate stage. And again, if she were to call me, I would say, do what you've been doing. As my dad used to say when I was successful, he'd say, do what you're doing. It's working for you. It's working for her. Don't get down at his muddy level and wrestle, but be clear on the topics. And if he undercuts himself, so be it.
Well, in terms of what's working for her, a kind of descriptor of what we've been seeing in terms of the fundraising and the energy, it's been said to me many times, it's vibes, Barbara, that this is vibes that she has going for her right now. Looking back at history, do vibes win presidential elections?
It's the first time as a political scientist, as well as someone who studies presidential history, that I've ever heard that term referred to. Usually it was the big mo, big momentum. I think it's similar to that. And I would say we saw that particularly in 2000, in 2008 with Barack Obama. There was a lot of joy and a lot of momentum. I'm not sure we called it a vibe in those days. Maybe we need to go back to the Beach Boys from the 1960s and good vibrations. But there is a certain vibrancy about Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, her running mate. They are energetic. They're joyful, as they're calling themselves, joyful warriors. And again, that seems to be working. And particularly if people are hoping for that. They're hoping for a sense of joy and positivity and optimism, which is not typically the Donald Trump approach to campaigning, or for that matter, for governing.
Well, so does that mean that they might be able to skate through the next 66 days, I believe it is, until Election Day on vibes alone, without having to get more specific about the actual kind of policy they would like to bring to the table? Obviously, Kamala Harris touched on some of that last night, large, broad strokes that we had already heard from her, but not very granular.
I'm always a little puzzled by that analysis, in that, for example, on the economy, she gave a pretty specific speech in Raleigh, North Carolina, a couple weeks ago about her economic plan. Now, it may not have all the details that some people would like. And then again, if she were to call me, I'd say, keep it about at that level. Obviously, come up with a theme. And for her, it's the opportunity economy. And then she had 3 or 4 different approaches to that, in terms of maybe offering first-time home buyers a $25,000 help for down payment from the government. Those kinds of things, I think she's been pretty specific on. And let's face it, if she doesn't get a Congress of her party, she won't be able to pass any of these things anyway. So I think she needs to be general yet specific. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but she needs to have the broad themes, as you say, the broad brushstrokes, and she needs to be as detailed as she can. She has been about Gaza. She has been about the economy. She has been about health care. She's been about access to reproductive freedom and IVF. So I do find it a little bit puzzling that people are saying she's not being specific. Maybe not specific enough for some people, but I would also contrast that with Donald Trump, who often doesn't offer specifics, or when he does, they're inaccurate.
Fair enough. I guess perhaps here at Bloomberg, where financial data and economic indicators and numbers are what we live for, maybe that's just what our audience might be looking for a little bit more of. My final question to you, Barbara, of course, is that we will hear from Kamala Harris and Donald Trump jointly on stage in less than 2 weeks in that debate on September 10th. We don't even have to look back to Kennedy and Nixon to understand that presidential debates could be transformative potentially in an election cycle. We've already seen this time around, because it was the June 27th debate that precipitated Joe Biden dropping out of the race. How consequential will September 10th be?
I think it will be if, for example, the vice president should have a terrible stumble. And that's what she has to avoid at all costs, a terrible misstatement. I go back to 1976 and Gerald Ford, the then president, running against Jimmy Carter and insisting that Poland was not under Soviet domination. Even when he was pressed on it, he said it again, and that was just inaccurate. It was a terrible misspeak. And that led in part to his losing a very close election to Jimmy Carter, in addition to the fact that Ford had pardoned Nixon, and that hurt him as well. And there was a bad economy with a lot of inflation. So, yes, avoid misspeaking, avoid inaccuracies. Again, don't get down at the same level as Trump, but be sharp and come back if she needs to come back at his accusations, or if she needs to correct him, or if she needs to just explain herself. But I think everybody knows what Donald Trump is like and how he will present himself and what kinds of things he'll say. She just needs to check another box and say, yep, got through that, didn't make any big mistakes, and show herself to be the professional that she is.